This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Good morning and welcome to Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond, back again at our popular broadcast time of 10 a.m. on a Saturday morning.
And today we're celebrating a birthday.
Yes, we are indeed, as Alex rightly says, a special episode which marks the first anniversary of the show. And we turn to the dramatic political week across the pond, with President Biden withdrawing from the presidential race.
Today we assess the possible outcome when Harris takes on Lewis. In other words, the result of the very likely new presidential lineup of Vice President Kamala Harris taking on former President Donald Trump, the son of Lewis-born Mary McLeod.
Well, of course, it would be fair to say that the Trump camp are exuding confidence about a contest against someone they see as an unpopular vice presidential incumbent. But will it turn out like that in November? Alex turns first to the spokeswoman of Republicans overseas, Jennifer Ewing. Over to Alex.
Jennifer Ewing of Republicans overseas, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Jennifer, this time last week, you were calling for President Biden to pull his name from the presidential race. Now he's done so. You must be overjoyed.
Yes and no. And actually, probably this time last year, I was on the record saying I didn't think he could be the nominee in November 2024. Anyone that was watching him, listening to him with their own eyes rather than filtered through the mainstream media could see he was in, sort of the deep throes of cognitive decline. So I feel somewhat vindicated in that I saw that. With regards to his no longer being the candidate, from a political perspective, we would have loved to have run against him because we would have beat him.
Well, that's my point. Surely the correct approach of the Republicans, not just overseas, but at home as well, would have been to let President Biden stand again, and then you would have been a shoo-in for the presidential race. Now you've introduced a note of uncertainty. Still favourites, but a note of uncertainty. Why'd you do that?
No, you're exactly right. And it's so funny because there are a lot of people, sort of right-wing pundits, hardcore Trump supporters who in the last 3 or 4 weeks, once, the jig was up with the media no longer running cover for Biden, started protecting Biden and saying, whoa, 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 whoa. If you guys try to yank him out of there because he clearly did not want to go, nor did his family want him to go, then this is interfering with the democratic process. And because they didn't really have a primary, 14 million Americans, Democrats, did vote for him. So you're right. A lot of Republicans did want to run against him. But in the end, it was just after that fateful debate and the media, stopped doing what they'd been doing for 3 years since he ran in 2020 out of his basement. They, the curtains raised up. We saw who we had, and they needed to scramble around and realize that they were going to lose, and not just the presidency, but also down ticket. So there's going to be a lot of questions asked, like who knew what and when.
Yes, I noticed that your vice presidential nominee, J.D. Vance, is calling for President Biden to stand down as president. Isn't that a bit like, kicking somebody when they're down? Isn't that not going to be seen as a bit too much by many Americans?
I don't think so. And we're not in a playground here, and Joe Biden, I would have loved for him to have been treated like an elderly man and had his family look after him and tell him not to run for a second term. That should have been done months ago, but it was not. And they selfishly stayed in the race. So JD Vance is just pointing out the obvious. If this man, and of course, Biden has not said the reason why he's pulling out, other than it's in the best interest of the party and the country. But we all can read between the lines. But, if he's not well enough to run a campaign, he certainly is not well enough to be president of the United States or indeed leader of the free world. So no, I don't think that's kicking someone when they're down.
But there's a bit of a difference, is there not, between being president for the next 6 months, just less than that, on the one hand, and potentially being president for the next 4.5 years on the other.
Absolutely. And if this man was able to, govern, and which I don't think he has been doing for quite some time, all you have to do is listen to some of the interviews that have taken place since that debate and listen to some of the things that he said and done and the confusion. And this is not a man who has his full mental capacity with him. And it's sad, but it's also scary for our country. And no, do you want this man? I mean, we're still allies. Do you want this man with his, the keys to the nuclear code, which he's clearly not running the country. So,
well, I asked myself that question many times, Jennifer, when Boris Johnson was Prime Minister. But now you've got a different opponent. You've got, looks like Kamala Harris, heavy odds on to be the contestant for the Democrats. Now, don't you feel that you've introduced someone who might emerge to be a really strong candidate with many things? I mean, even Donald Trump once contributed, it said, to her campaign funds when she was running to be prosecutor in California.
So one thing she does have going for her is a youth and energy, right? She's a lot younger than Biden and Trump, for that matter. So now the Democrats can look over at the Republican ticket and say, our candidate is much older. However, it stops there. She still has the same Biden policies, which have not been helpful to the American people. And the second thing is she is complicit in this cover-up of Joe Biden's health. So she was very close to him. They apparently had, this wonderful partnership of a president, vice president. She was on television as recently as last week trying to convince the American public that he was fine. There was nothing to worry about. So I think as people start to look at who knew what when with regards to the president's mental capacity, she's going to be implicated in this, as well she should, as well as everybody that was covering up for him.
But it's not just going to be a question of youth against age when she takes on former President Trump. It's also going to be the questions about his mental capacity. Now, many people, all sides of the pond, admired the way he recovered from the assassination attempt. But when you saw his speech at the Republican convention, after the first bit, it seemed to ramble on almost to eternity. And you got to think, what on earth was he doing? What on earth was he thinking about?
Well, actually, Alex, he broke his own record. So I think he was the previous record holder for the longest speech. So he does like to give long speeches. Fortunately, in the world we live today, people just watch the clips. So he might be okay. He might not have put too many people to sleep. But no, that convention was a huge success.
But people said he was falling asleep himself. I don't think that was during his own speech. I think that was elsewhere. Or was he just listening intently to what the representatives had to say?
Well, one thing he did do that a lot of presidential nominees do not do, or presumptive nominees, is attend every single speech. So he was there the entire time. So I'll let that slide. I didn't see any clips of him falling asleep, but I'll take your word for it if you in fact did.
I'm thinking that, let's go back to the fact that when I knew the Donald, let's give him his Scottish title, at first he was a registered Democrat, and he was supporting people like Kamala Harris. He didn't seem to give her all that much for her campaign, incidentally, but he was supporting the Clinton Foundation, for example. I mean, how steady do you think Donald Trump's views are? Or do you think they evolve depending on the situation and the speech he's making?
That's a great question and very good point. And you're right. He was a New York Democrat, and he had always been, and people knew that. What's interesting, when he ran the first time, he was very much trying to get the sort of the right-hand side of the party, whether it's the Christian evangelicals or the more conservatives on board. This time around, he's gone way more moderate. You can see that in the GOP platform that they're using of policies. I mean, have done a few things that are actually upsetting some people on the right or the more conservative side of the party. For example, on the platform, it no longer says that marriage is traditional between a man and a woman. That's one thing. And then the second thing is it no longer calls for a national abortion ban. So Donald Trump has actually gone probably back to his roots somewhat, where he's more moderate. Now, what I would say is we are looking at someone, it's similar to like when Ronald Reagan attracted the Reagan Democrats. So what you've got here is the parties have done a little bit of a switch. The Democrats, who used to be the party of unions and workers and blue collar people, are now the party of Hollywood elites and the ultra wealthy, or indeed the non-working poor. And the Republicans are the party of the working class, the middle class, and as we'd say in our country, even the upper middle class, who realize, the biggest issues, economy, inflation, and of course, the crisis we have at our southern border, which Kamala Harris was tasked with looking into. And, it's been an absolute disaster since Biden and Harris got into office and ripped up Trump's policies, whether it be Remain in Mexico or the others. We've had 10 million illegal people cross into the border. And the people who get hurt by that the most are a lot of these working class people, Hispanic voters, Black voters, and it's their neighborhoods that are being damaged, their schools that are being affected. So these are the people that are looking to President Trump this time around.
But if Donald Trump, according to your argument, is moving somewhat back to his liberal past, then why did he select J.D. Vance as his running mate, as opposed to, well, somebody like yourself, Jennifer Ewing, somebody who would be more in line with this new moderate consensual Trump that we're looking forward to seeing over the next few months?
Well, I'm flattered. Thank you. And actually, J.D. Vance was my pick. I'm a huge fan of J.D. Vance. I read his book in 2016 before Trump was even elected, called Hillbilly Elegy, for those of you who've not read it. And the thing with J.D. Vance is it's not that he's so hardcore right or anything. It's that he represents the American dream, or what once was the American dream. That you can come from extreme poverty, addiction, even a very violent past, and somehow become the vice presidential nominee. He has an incredible story of sort of his grandmother having to look after him because there was addiction with his mother, and then she kept him on the straight and narrow, probably with the 19 loaded handguns they found when she passed away. But he goes off, joins the Marines after 9/11, and then gets into Yale Law School, becomes a senator, and the rest is history. So again, he's the American dream, and it's the perfect choice.
But thinking about the American dream, wouldn't Kamala Harris represent part of the American dream, a woman of color, achieving high office in politics, really for the first time from somebody from that area of American society? And you, as a woman, when you think about issues such as abortion rights, don't you find yourself with some sympathy to the likely Democrat nominee?
I do not. And I cannot wait to have a woman as president, but not her. And I think if we are describing the American dream just by immutable characteristics, whether that's your gender or the color of your skin, we're missing out on meritocracy, and we're missing out on who's best for the job. And I think that there are plenty of wonderful women out there, and I can't wait for one to be president, but it's not going to be her.
So Jennifer, let me put your head on the block. Is Donald Trump going to be the Republican candidate? We would think so. Is Kamala Harris going to be the Democrat candidate, or do you still have doubts about that? And if that is the runoff, how certain are you, right down to your boots, that your man will prevail over this new emerging candidate in Kamala Harris?
Sure. To the first question is yes, Donald Trump will be our candidate. And the main reason is we had a primary. The Republicans actually had a primary. So you'll recall there was, Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, Ron DeSantis, Chris Christie, quite a few candidates. And the people chose Donald Trump. So yes, he will be the candidate. Kamala Harris, I don't think she will be. And the reason is because the Democrats actually never had a primary, and they should have. You'll recall they kept Bobby Kennedy Jr. off the ticket. They changed over 60 laws so certain people could not challenge the president in this primary. So now you have him saying, okay, I'm not going to run again, but I endorse Kamala Harris. Not only did she not win a primary, even when she was running in 2020, she didn't win a primary.
And there's no danger you're going to be regretful of what you wished for?
Well, I mean, look, what I wish for is just that America can go back to the country it was 4.5 years ago. And don't forget, this is the election. This was the rematch that 75% of Americans did not want to see, right? People did not want to see Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, / Kamala Harris. I think the Democrats, they've got youth on their side now, so they've got a few other things, but she still has the same policies as him. And if they bring somebody else into that, are they going to run on the same policies? Or is any of the talent, there's some great Democratic governors out there, and are they going to blow up their career getting in last minute? I don't think so. I think they're going to probably run until, wait until 2028. But watch this space. I think there are definitely more surprises to come.
Well, Jennifer Ewing will be watching this side of the pond from Scotland with great interest. And thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thanks.
Welcome back. Our programme last week on oil and gas brought forward some immediate results with the announcement this week of a Scottish Government investment in carbon capture technology. Does this signal a change in approach to the Scottish Government's hostility to new oilfield development? And will Labour in London, who call the shots, sheath the Miliband dagger aimed at the heart of tens of thousands of oil and gas jobs?
Now that the Labour Party are in government, and they will be having these conversations with senior Treasury officials and senior officials within DESNZ. One, we need the energy security that is afforded by the North Sea to ensure that the lights remain on and we can heat our homes. But also there is a fiscal reality too, that this is a sector that drives significant revenues via the Exchequer, which fund the policy proposals that Labour have also included in their manifesto, which they will want to see rolled out.
How feasible would it be to put a licence condition of carbon abatement, carbon capture on every single licence?
Well, I think that's a key and very good proposition, and that's a proposition that ourselves in the University of Edinburgh and colleagues in the University of Oxford have been promoting since about 2015, that the ability to produce more fossil carbon from the ground should be linked with an obligation of returning the fossil carbon to the ground, because what we need as a society is the energy from that, and we don't need the carbon dioxide. That's a waste. So just like many other items you might buy, we need to recycle and put the waste back where it came from, the same as recycling a car for its components, for example, or dismantling electrical equipment. We don't just throw that away. We have to, with the sale of that comes the obligation to do the cleanup. And that's what we need to do for this energy industry.
This is what you had to say about our show last week. JD Anderson says, used to work in the industry, still a few pals in Aberdeen. It's not what it was of late 90s and 2000s, but it still generates millions and vital to many industries from pharmaceutical to rubber. Wind and solar can't produce those. 1960 Eagle Eyes says, "As long as Scottish oil is sold on the open market, you will not get cheap energy in this country." Jared Phillips says, "In short, Starmer is not the answer. In fact, him and his collection of wokarati have no clue how to solve it." And finally, Neil Hanby tweets, "Another important show which breaks down the folly of Labour and SNP hostility to Scotland's North Sea oil and gas sector, while setting out the solution for a real just transition and the protection of jobs. Must watch." So we are set, therefore, for a towsy autumn with political storm clouds across the Atlantic. But what is it like to represent Scotland in Washington? After the break, Alex will find out with former Scottish Councillor in the United States, Daniel Jack. Join us in.
Uh, 10 years ago, when you were doing that job for Scotland, was Donald Trump regarded as a serious political figure?
Well, I would say absolutely not at that point. He was emerging, he was slowly getting his campaign together. But around that time, it was before he'd actually declared his presidency. And I remember at the time, we were watching the live broadcast in the embassy of him making an announcement he's standing for the presidency. And people were just laughing. You know, they viewed him as a joke, actually. And in my discussions with people in the establishment, if you like, in Washington, that's how they viewed him initially. He wasn't a serious candidate.
And yet 10 years later, we know that no Republican, no Democrat, save Joe Biden, has beaten Donald Trump in any election.
Indeed. I mean, it's a remarkable feat when you think about it. Someone who's had no political background to achieve the highest office in America is quite remarkable. One thing I would say about Donald Trump is he arouses strong passions in people. You know, lots of people hate him, but lots of people hold him in adulation. And it's quite amazing. He sort of re-energized the whole political scene in America. And I think overall it's a good thing.
So that's a surprise. I mean, people were watching this program, you know, flinging things at the television set, you know, saying if that's energy, you know, let's have immobility.
Yes. Well, I think it's good that people who felt disenfranchised from the whole political system, you know, the Donald Trump narrative, let's drain the swamp, let's get rid of the establishment. And he's appealed to people who felt that they were disenfranchised, not necessarily by not being able to vote, but by the actions of the elite in Washington not taking them into account.
But many of the passions that he's aroused, I mean, if a conventional politician, certainly in the post-war era, had made the sort of speeches that Trump has made, you'd expect him to have been run out of politics, run out of town.
Yes.
The local sheriff would have done the job.
Absolutely. But then that's part of his appeal, isn't it? He is conducting a narrative deliberately, which is appealing to people who have felt they have no place in American politics, no interest in American politics. he's making it relevant.
Now, Trump just had a, inevitably successful, after the failed assassination attempt, inevitably successful Republican convention. Is he unstoppable now? Does he just have to show that picture of the fist aloft, recovering from the sniper's bullet, and he's a shoo-in for November?
I'm not sure if he's a shoo-in, but I think he is going to win in November. And I think that it's a much abused phrase. I think that picture of him with his face and the blood on his face and his fist raised and the American flag in the background has become iconic. And I think that will secure it for him.
Do you think, looking back over these past 240 years or so, that this Scottish experiment of the United States of America has been an unmitigated success?
No, I wouldn't say that. It's had its flaws, hasn't it?
So if we went back and started again, would we get rid of this government by the people stuff, or what?
I'm not sure if that's where I would start. I would certainly get rid of the Second Amendment, the right to bear guns and things like that, yeah.
So Daniel, let me take you back to the days when you were looking at these telegrams saying there's this joke candidate called Donald Trump coming forward. These would be going to Philip Hammond, who was the Foreign Secretary then. And now, of course, there's a new Foreign Secretary, a very different one. How is the new Labour Foreign Secretary likely to go down in the United States?
Well, I think the reality is he's not likely to go down any different from a Tory Foreign Secretary. The UK government makes a big song and dance about the special relationship. But when you're there in Washington, you can see that the special relationship is switched on and off when the Americans feel like it. You know, when it suits them, they punt the special relationship. When it doesn't, they punt other people.
But then David Lammy will be a bit of a contrast with Lord Cameron, will he not?
Yes, although Lord Cameron was better known, of course, when his time as Prime Minister. So he is better known in the corridors of power in Washington. And David Lammy is new, and I suppose all the support mechanisms will be in place to make sure he makes the right contacts early doors.
Now, you were in charge of the government aspect to the Tartan week-long, I think I was going to call it day celebrations, but the Tartan week celebrations as they became, which raised Scotland's profile in the United States. How would an independent Scotland go down in the United States of America? I mean, would that be like a 52-week Tartan week, or would we just get a limited amount of American bandwidth even as an independent country?
Well, that's an interesting question, because you will know of the well-known definition of what is a diplomat. A diplomat is an honest man who's sent abroad to lie for his country.
Well, of course, somebody can tell you to go to hell and leave you looking forward to the trip.
Yes, but my response to that was, that never happened to me. Because whenever I said I was representing Scotland, they welcomed me with open arms. People were very receptive, very responsive. And they wanted to know about Scotland, they wanted to know about the Scottish Government. Independence came up in conversations regularly, but they didn't understand enough about it, I think. So to answer your question, I think an independent Scotland would be viewed very favourably. Maybe not initially in the establishment of Washington, but amongst the American people, definitely.
And did nobody in America thinking about Donald Trump ask why Mary McLeod from Lewis never said no to her favourite son?
No. I think Donald Trump, I had to tell Americans that he was half Scottish, because they really didn't know that. And that came as a surprise to them. So no.
No, Donald Trump used to describe to me his ancestry as serious Scottish.
Oh, serious.
Presumably because it was far north.
As opposed to unserious Scottish.
Well, that's the rest of us.
Yes, indeed.
Dr. Jack, thank you so much for joining me on Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.
Water is life, but not all water is equal. Our water ionizer restructures and alkalizes water for optimum hydration and detoxification, recreating the planet's ultimate water sources, found in lightning-struck lakes and newly melted icebergs. H2 Pure Source. Change your water. Change your life.
You should be careful what you wish for, I think is the motto of an Aesop's fable. But I wonder if it applies to the Republican Party in the United States. They've been for months campaigning on the disability of President Biden, his inability to perform the functions of office, and certainly the idea of performing them for the next 4 or 5 years was ridiculous. So they've been calling on Biden to step down as the Democrat presidential candidate. And of course that's quite sensible, because Joe Biden is the only politician, Democrat or Republican, who's actually beaten Donald Trump in a contest. And he did actually beat him for the benefit of all members of the Republican Party. But I'm interested in whether Kamala Harris, who the Republicans assumed was going to be deeply unpopular, isn't going to be a more viable candidate than President Biden. I don't think that the signs of Biden's failing were as great and mentally as they were physically, but nonetheless that was the image that had been characterised on Biden, and they were going to find it very difficult to sustain a campaign. Kamala Harris will have youth on her side, and I think she's been underrated as a politician. She was the prosecutor in California. You don't become the prosecutor in California without being a tough cookie. And from her background as a woman of colour, emerging as a serious force, the most important woman in American politics, that requires resolve as well. Yes, it's true her previous presidential bid was not one that covered her in glory, but she'll probably have learned lessons from that and her 4 years as vice president to a supremely clever operator like Joe Biden. So I think Kamala Harris may be a much more formidable candidate than the Republicans think. And of course, all the jibes about an ailing, aged man trying to cling on to be president, trying to run again for past glories, instead of the Republicans flinging these at the Democrats, it'll now be the Democrats who fling them at the Republicans. And that's why at the end of the day, when it comes to a contest between a macho man like Donald Trump and a tough cookie like Kamala Harris, I'm not at all sure it's not the lady who's going to triumph. And therefore the Republican Party should be careful what they wish for. And also remember, since we started with Aesop's fables, the immortal words of Zsa Zsa Gabor: macho men ain't macho.
And with that, we come to the end of this week's show on the big election bust-up across the Atlantic. Join us next week for some more key interviews on Scotland's life and times. And between now and then, you can always catch up on this show if you haven't seen it all, and previous shows on every social media channel going. Until next week, when we hope to see you, stay safe, take care, bye-bye for now.
This is an exciting time in Scotland's story, and understanding our past will help us determine our future. And when Scotland's voice is heard, it charts the way forward. This is Scotland Speaks with Alex Salmond.